I'm Jeremy Parish, and this is The Games Behind the Games. In this series, game developers and creators talk about the games that influence their current work while playing those games. This episode, we're in Tokyo, Japan, at the headquarters of 84 Limited to talk to John Ricciardi about the original Legend of Zelda and how that's influenced 84's work. So John, why is The Legend of Zelda such a big deal for you?
Zelda's probably the first game that ever really captured me and made me feel like, oh my god, video games are like the most amazing things ever. There's magic about it. I remember when I remember every little detail about Zelda, like from the gold cart to like whose house I was at when I first played it.
I don't know if you remember the commercials for this on TV.
Oh yeah, totally.
With like, The Legend of Zelda, a never-ending adventure new for your Nintendo Entertainment System. That was such a big deal. It was like, this game is so big, you'll never be able to finish it.
Yeah. Zelda was huge, and huge in terms of like, it was a long game, it had battery backup. There was no internet, so you had to rely on game magazines and the Nintendo Fun Club news and your friends' tips and stuff.
For me, this game, like the flow of information was all kind of one direction. It was people who had played it already telling me stuff like, there's this place in the hills where you have to just keep going up and up and up, but eventually like there's something up there, it's so crazy. Yep. So I just absorbed all of this, and when I finally played it, those kind of were my waypoints for this.
The map that came with it was also amazing because, like, I love the fact that it was partially not complete. You had to
it was like, here there be dragons. What's up in those corners?
Just left so much open to your imagination, Breath of the Wild was being so influenced by this game brought me like pure joy because I was like, finally they're going back to like the original Zelda, which was exploration, kind of no hand-holding, and just leave you alone in this world to figure it out. So I actually recently played through this all the way. Sad news, bummer, I'm gonna bring this all down, but my mom passed away earlier this year.
I'm sorry, I didn't know that.
She was very old, like she was 80 something, and she lived a long, awesome life, and she played a lot of video games too, actually. And she used to play this a bunch, and so when I was home, I had to go home for the funeral and everything, home in America, and I brought my Switch with me, and I played all the way through this and Zelda 2, like during that week, just as like I wasn't really thinking about it at the time, but looking back, I probably just wanted some like comfort food, and like, it was a way to distract myself from what was going on. But I played all the way through, and then all the way through the second quest.
Wow, that takes steely nerve.
It does, yeah, and I did it without dying because I wanted to like, because I used to do that when I was a kid. I used to replay this game like once a year. Like, this is a game that was like so familiar to me, and it doesn't get old. It's still really good even today.
So let's talk a little bit about kind of how you got to where you are. You work in localization, so it's not like you design games that are based on Zelda or anything like that.
If you look even at the name of our company is called A4, right? Which is a reference to the last stage of Super Mario Brothers. Like, this era in gaming, the 80s, is hugely influential in like my tastes, and when we started A4, we wanted to have a little bit of that flavor in our name itself to sort of show our roots and where we came from. And so yeah, we chose Super Mario Brothers because it was cool, and having a name that's a number has a lot of advantages, and there was just cool reasons to do that. But if there was something cool from Zelda that I could have referenced, I would have.
It's probably good that you didn't call your company Death Mountain.
Yeah, maybe not.
You're working on some big projects. You've been working on stuff like Deltarune and Undertale, so
sure, yeah.
Fire Emblem, that stuff's crazy.
We're very fortunate to do a lot of work with Nintendo, which is amazing because as a kid growing up, that's where I was playing most of my games. Zelda definitely is one of the games that made me realize that I actually specifically like Japanese games. Like, yeah, I like all games, but at that time, most of the games coming from the West were pretty bad. I mean, I would say 90% of them are garbage.
For consoles? Oh yeah,
yeah. For consoles,
the good stuff was on
PC. PC was a different story.
Yeah, the console market imploded in the US, and every good developer was like, forget that, we're out of here.
Most of the great games are coming from Japan, and that kind of just put Japan as a concept on the map for me, games like this, and like, oh, okay, cool, these games are all coming from Japan. Nintendo is a Japanese company. Japan seems pretty cool. It wasn't until the Super Nintendo when I was playing games and some of them started not coming to America, when I was like, okay, if I want to play this game in this series that I like, I'm going to have to start importing games or whatever, and one thing led to another, and I realized I wanted to live here, and I was only going to live here for a year, but now I'm here for going on year 19, so.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
So what was the first game that didn't come to the US that you were like, FOMO?
Dragon Quest V.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were a big fan of Dragon Warrior, right?
I was huge into it. I still own all 4 of the NES games. I was like the one guy waiting to buy them on day one. And 5 didn't come out in America, and so I imported it. That was the first game I imported. Zelda's localization was fine. In fact, a lot of people talk about localization, air quotes, but I think Zelda was literally put in English in Japan by the Japanese dev team, and I mean, it kind of shows sometimes. This was the kind of game, certainly, that led to many other games that were kind of really important when it comes to role-playing games. If you have a bad localization, it's terrible. And I remember,
I mean, even in this game, there are a few spots where you're like, what is that supposed to mean? Like,
right.
Secret is in the tip of the nose.
Right.
What is that?
But it worked because it was obscure, and it's like, okay, well, I guess they're being obscure because they don't want you to get the hint, as opposed to no, some guy just translated it poorly.
Like this example here, Dodongo dislikes smoke. What did that tell you as a kid?
I don't think I got it at first. I think it took me. I had to someone else. I mean, I'm not I was always like, wait, what? What does that mean? But every now and then you got a message like this and you figured it out. And Zelda made you feel like the smartest person ever, and it's always been that way. Some of those hints. There's a great book written by a mutual friend of ours, Clyde Mandelin, called Legends of Localization, and there's a book on Zelda 1. And if you haven't checked it out, I highly recommend it because it goes through the entire game, pretty much I think every line of text in the game, and explains the roots and the original Japanese for it and how it turned in English. How some of them were changed during development for English, which I do not believe was a localization mistake. I believe the devs decided to change stuff.
Yeah, well, some of those have been kind of reintegrated into the Japanese, right?
Yeah, exactly. Occasionally, yeah. That does happen.
To me, that's a great example of sort of how localization kind of works in both directions, and localization can affect an actual game. Like a great example is Earthbound Earthbound Beginnings, I guess is what it's called now. And they had like these crows that were smoking cigarettes in the Japanese version.
Right.
And the localized version took those cigarettes out. Mm-hmm. And there was some doubt about whether the leaked ROM that showed up like 20 years ago was legitimate. But then the Game Boy Advance remake of Earthbound made that change and took the cigarettes away from the crow, because they were like, hey, maybe let's not show kids animals cutely smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. Stories like that are amazing, and there's actually other stuff too. Like the ending of the U.S. version is more detailed than the Japanese version of Mother, and they did that. They put that in the Game Boy Advance version as well. And then when it finally did come out later, it turned out, oh yeah, that ROM that was out was actually legit.
During the NES era, you had localizations like Dragon Warrior, where it was kind of like everything was put into Shakespearean English.
Sure.
But for the most part, English was much more like this kind of terse, sometimes syntactically awkward text. And then A Link to the Past just felt it had personality and warmth, and like characters had a very casual way of speaking. Like they would say things like, hey, what's up? Like real people do. And
I think that was Dan Osen, who's still at Nintendo now, who we actually work with on some stuff like separately, which is super unreal and weird. But Nintendo of America specifically was one of the first companies to realize that, as part of their overall focus on quality, that meant that the screen text in the games needed to be, good as well. And I'm so happy they did, because there are companies even today that still feel like that's the last concern.
Machine translation's good enough for us.
Yeah. All these people on this team are spending months of their life and working like mad to make this game that's something important to them. Like, you should care about how it's presented to players in the West as well. When we started A4, at that time especially, there was not a lot of good localization going on, and Nintendo was there, but they were only doing Nintendo games. What about everybody else,
Right.
And we thought we could do like a twofold thing. Like, one thing is we could make better games by working on them ourselves, but another thing too is in the process of that we could explain to developers and sort of educate them on why, developers here in Japan that is, why it's important to spend time and resources on localization. Like, the general awareness and understanding of localization has definitely improved. And I'd like to think we had a small part of that, but at the same time we were doing all this, Square Enix was starting to take localization seriously and built up their massive department, and Nintendo continued to do amazing work on a lot of their stuff. So it's nice that it's no longer like an afterthought, but I still think there's room to improve in how companies here treat localizations, but I'm glad to see it's a lot better than it used to be. Now that we've started dabbling in a little bit of game development ourselves, we've done a couple of ports and stuff here and everything, I see certain difficulties in implementing things that we've asked for in games. Hey, we want the text to be able to deal with plurals, and text can't fit in a window. Okay, instead of making the localizer shorten it to something nonsensical, make it so the text scrolls, or make it so the text shrinks inside the box. There's things you can do. And a lot of times in the past, we've had developers telling us, oh, that's like way too much work, it's impossible, blah, blah, blah. But now that we've done a bunch of it ourselves, it's like, this isn't that bad. Like, if you know what you're doing and you care about it, you can do this in like a day or whatever, a lot of times. So we push a little harder on stuff like that now.
Just to wrap, when you were playing
Yeah.
Zelda as a kid, did you ever imagine yourself working on games like this? Working on games that would be on the cover of Japanese games magazines?
No. When I say this often, but like if I could go back and tell my kid self some of the stuff that we've gotten to work on, his head would explode, I think. And that's awesome. Like, I'm super thankful for what we do. I love this industry. I love that we can, try to have a positive impact in it. But yeah, man, we've gotten to work as 8-4. We've gotten to work on some of my favorite franchises. I mean, we even did a Dragon Quest game. The first game that came out that we worked on as 8-4 was Mario Tennis for Game Boy Advance. So we got to work on a Nintendo game, a Mario game,
and an RPG,
and an RPG, and it was Game Boy Advance. So like we have games going back as far as Game Boy Advance. We try to constantly, one-up ourselves and do new and interesting things, but all of it is with the interest of trying to further the industry, not just localization, but just in general, and make games, better. It sounds kind of, cheesy, but it's totally true. That's like why we exist.
That's awesome.